Welcome to Smarter, Richer, Braver, the podcast that's especially curated for a generation of young people who want to step up, stand out, and live life on their own terms. A generation who aim to do better, not just for themselves, but for humanity as a whole. A generation who aim to be smarter, richer, and braver, because that's exactly what the world today needs. I'm your host, Marilyn Pinto, author and founder at KFI Global, and I'd like to warmly welcome all you Gen Zers. A special shout out to all our KFI Global students listening in. Please know that this podcast was made with you in mind, and I promise it's going to be worth your attention.
This podcast is strictly for those 25 years and younger. If you are older than that, please listen at your own risk. Common side effects include regret and anger for not having heard this earlier in your life.
Today we're going to talk about something that most people fear more than death itself. No, I'm not kidding. According to research by the Institutes of Mental Health, 75% of people fear death less than they do public speaking. The scientific term for this is glossophobia, and it ranges from mild nervousness to full-on panic and fear. And for a very long time, I was firmly in the full-on panic and fear category. Until a couple of years ago, I attended a program by our guest here today, which literally changed everything. So join us on this episode with Eric Edmeades, world-renowned speaker and behavioral expert, as he educates and entertains you in a way that only he can. I must warn you though, listening to him will deeply impact you, and I hope guide you to living a life that's smarter, richer, and a whole lot braver. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I'm so glad you could do this. 75%, that's a huge number, right? And I think a lot of the fear probably stems around a lot of the misconceptions that swirl around the art of public speaking. Could you take us through some of the main misconceptions people have about public speaking?
Yeah, what is the actual consequence? If somebody is asking you to jump out of a plane, then being afraid is a justifiable situation.
That's true.
But then if you think about it, if you have a parachute on, then it's not that justifiable, but you're still going to be scared because there's a perception that, it could go very badly. But with public speaking, it's very different. There's really no real consequence. Now, I will say that today, obviously, if somebody says the wrong thing in this political climate, maybe they could face some canceling. Maybe they could face some online, backlash. But the truth is, the vast majority of us won't have that. We show up, we deliver talk, people get information, maybe they laugh, maybe they think, and then we go about our day. And what's crazy is that so many people are afraid of just that little exchange. But I can tell you largely where it comes from. It's a very small thing. And it has a little bit to do with compassion. So I want you to imagine that you have two children and they're doing a presentation for, say, the whole school. And the first child goes up and does the most beautiful presentation. It's perfect. Perfect props, maybe nice slides, well-dressed, everything flows smoothly. This child is going to get an applause and a good grade, and it's going to be fantastic. But now the second child comes up, and the second child struggles. The slides don't really work. The child is blushing, tears in their eyes, stuttering. They forget what they're going to say, but they make it all the way to the end. Here's the question: which child gets the bigger applause? Now, the problem with all that is that you go to school for 12 years plus experiencing that. Even if you're in the audience, what you just learned is that if I make things look harder than they really are, I will get more praise. And so at first, it becomes an unconscious and unauthentic request for sympathy or request for praise. But soon, what was an act becomes real.
Yeah.
Well, now you've got these children that have learned that if they make it look difficult, if they make it look good, then they're just going to get a nice applause. But if they make it look difficult, they're going to get all the applause. They're going to get all the praise. And so now the problem is pretty soon they forget that they're acting and they think it actually is hard. And now you cause all kinds of problems, adrenaline, cortisol, then that affects their memory. And then that does start making it hard. And now they're trapped in glossophobia.
That does actually make sense. That's a powerful misconception. I'd like you to talk to the kids a little bit about why you think this is such a critical life skill and how having this skill would just impact their lives.
Maybe one of the best examples of this comes from one of Malcolm Gladwell's books. And he was talking about intelligence and the correlation between intelligence and happiness, which apparently there isn't. He was able to use his communication skills to fix it. And so I want to suggest that, we can make this about public speaking, but the truth is it's about communication, and communication changes everything. It really is the quest to become comfortable with your words. Here's the thing. How many times have you walked away from an exchange, you walked away from a conversation and you thought, I wish I had said that? Well, what if you could? What if you could get to the place where you really trusted yourself to speak your mind in an effective way? Then your entire life changes.
That's such a wonderful way of thinking about it. Could you take us through some of the common mistakes that speakers make and maybe show us how to remedy them?
Here's some of the really common ones. One is writing out your speech. It's a really big one. When you write out your speech, you engage a different type of memory. And that memory is a linear memory. It's kind of like the way people remember the alphabet. Like most people can't do the alphabet backwards. They just can't, in my opinion. And there are times for written speeches. If you're giving a politically sensitive speech, because that now could be interpreted as an act of war. Exactly. So there are certain circumstances where, your speeches might be politically sensitive or legally sensitive, in which case, okay, they got to be scripted and approved by lawyers or whatever, but that's not most of us. And then related to that mistake is don't practice them. Sure, you should practice the stories. You should be very good at the various stories that you want to tell, but don't stand in front of a mirror and practice or camera. If you ever see somebody speaking to a camera instead of people, what ends up happening, it's so interesting. There's people and they make a mistake. They just keep going because that's life.
Yeah.
But if there's a camera, they're like, hi, my name is Eric. And what's going on is that person's trying to memorize their words. And so they've got themselves in a trap. Think about how much easier it is for you and I to simply have a conversation than it is for you to try to give a perfect introduction, right? Very different thing. So writing out speeches is generally a bad idea. And also being dependent upon notes or slides. Slides can be useful. They can be used for evidence. If you're speaking about a principle that you need to demonstrate the evidence, they can be used as an evidentiary example. And sometimes there's an emotional side to it. You just want to show slides that evoke an emotional response from the audience. But what slides should never really be is content. And they definitely shouldn't be content that you need. A very good friend of mine is the CEO of my publisher, Mind Valley Vision, and he was here in Dubai. He was at a big event, and there were some problems, and they had to move him from one day to another day. We've discussed strategies for dealing with that. But then when he was finally supposed to go on stage, the projector didn't work, and he had 90 slides. He wrote me on WhatsApp immediately after it, and he says, Eric, my slides wouldn't work, and I just had to do it exactly the way you always describe it. Just go through it. Don't be dependent on the slides. And he goes, honestly, I think it might have been one of the best I've ever done. And people in the audience wrote to me and said, that was the best he's ever done. And the trouble is that slides, they cause all kinds of problems, but one of them is dependency. And so if something happens to your slides, you're stuck. But the other thing they do is they cause you to have to think logically instead of creatively. So you're like, I have to give my talk and then I have to press the button. Or I have my slides all pre-programmed, which means I have to deliver my talk on a very specific timing, which is not conducive with authentic delivery.
Right. What do you think, in your opinion, is the best trait for a speaker to have, or the most useful trait for a speaker to have? Is there something like that?
I really believe that the single best trait that any speaker can have is authenticity. Be the same person off the stage as you're on the stage. You now don't have to put on an act. You don't have to remember things. You're just you. But the other reason is that humans have a very powerful instinct, and the instinct is to preferentially select an authentic enemy over an inauthentic friend. And so when you think how powerful that is, well, now that same instinct is at play when you're speaking at an event or you're teaching or you have an audience. The audience is immediately, they're sensing if this person is authentic or not. And I'll tell you what, the younger generation that's coming up now, I think they're already more sensitive to it, and they're going to become even more sensitive to it because they're going to grow up with deepfakes. They're going to grow up with all kinds of AI stuff. So they're going to be very skeptical, always skeptical. So when they see somebody on stage, they're already going to be, looking, is this real? True. And so the more authentic you are, the more attractive you're going to be and the more impact you're going to have.
The younger generation can sense this better and more quickly and more quicker. I talk to a lot of students, and a lot of them want to be confident speakers. But of course, fear gets in the way. Can you talk them through some of maybe understanding this fear first and then giving them some strategies to overcome them?
Sure. So I think the first thing to understand about the fear is that there is nothing actually to be afraid of. What you have to recognize is that there's literally nothing worthwhile doing in your life that you got right every single time you did it. It just should be perfect every time. But so now let's talk a little bit about biochemistry, like what's going on inside the body. That's really powerful. So let's say, well, before we get to biochemistry, let's talk a little bit about rules. If you're talking to somebody about their fear of public speaking, you'll be amazed at how many rules are involved. This is a really great one. I'm okay with every audience. Okay, what if your dad walked in, right? Like, so people have these rules, and that only shows that these are just about beliefs. They're not genuine. There's not actually any danger. So once we understand that, now let's take a look at a couple of other principles. Here's one. Most emotional states are biochemically distinct inside us, and physically distinct. So if you have a friend who's depressed, you know how they look. If you have a friend that's angry, you know roughly how they look. You know what the physical traits are. If you have somebody who's excited and you also have somebody who's nervous, they are in exactly the same state.
Yeah.
It's indistinguishable, except maybe tiny little bit in their facial expression. And the only other place you can tell the difference is in their head. Because somebody who is excited about something scary is nervous, and somebody who is nervous about something amazing is excited. It's the same emotion. All that has to shift to change the meaning is your expectation of the outcome. That's it.
Just your state of mind at that point.
Imagine going on a date. If you're going on the date and you expect it to go badly, then you're going to be nervous. If you go on the date and you expect it to go well, you're going to be excited, right? So this is a very important thing to understand. Now let's add the biochemistry piece to it. Most people spend a large part of their day breathing in the upper part of their lungs, and they don't do like deep diaphragmatic breathing. And this is a very important thing because you see, when humans, for most of our history, if you were in danger, you would breathe quietly and you would breathe in the top of your lungs. So you produce adrenaline and you produce cortisol and you produce stress chemicals. And here's the crazy thing about stress chemicals. They don't make anybody smarter. Like the adrenaline is not a smart drug. When you have a lot of adrenaline, you become less intelligent and you become less empathetic, which of course is not going to help you when you're doing a presentation. So now somebody has some fear. They start producing cortisol and adrenaline. That affects their memory. It affects their perception. It affects the way they see the world. And all of a sudden, their fear becomes a spiraling loop. So one of the most powerful things that you can do after creating a positive expectation is to breathe really deeply. When people are using drugs, alcohol, sugar, cocaine, heroin, and they stop taking them, they go through horrible withdrawal symptoms. It's terrible. When they give up vaping and smoking, nothing happens to them. And that's because I don't really believe there's a chemical addiction there. There's a behavior. And the behavior that the people are addicted to is deep breathing. So the deep breathing is one of the most powerful ways to calm your nervous system, reduce your cortisol, and eliminate the stress. And so if you just do those two things, if you create a positive expectation in your head and you breathe deeply, you cut your stress down by half. Okay, there's one more.
Okay.
Never, ever, never tell the audience that you're nervous. And by the way, I don't even mean never tell them with the words. I mean, you shouldn't do that either, but don't even tell them with your body. Don't do those nervous tick things that people do. Nervousness is an inauthentic plea for sympathy and attention. That's all it is in this context. It's a learned way of getting a bigger applause. It's a learned way of getting more love. It's a learned way of getting more praise. And so that's another really important thing is that when you do a presentation, no matter how nervous you feel, no matter how much vibration you feel, you don't admit it to the audience ever. And here's the downside. The first few times you do this, you'll get less praise, maybe not as big an applause, but you will believe every single person who comes and tells you that it was fantastic. And that means the next time you'll walk on with way more confidence and way less nerves. And by the end of the third or fourth time, you'll be done.
That's such great advice. I want to go back to something that you said about beliefs. I remember you saying something like beliefs are microorganisms, and you use a very nice metaphor. I'd love if you could just explain that.
Yeah, the metaphor is that beliefs are like, they are like little parasites, and they feed. And what they feed on is evidence. So if you have a belief about something, what it's doing is it's constantly looking around for self-justifying evidence. This is a really crazy example, but we have this expression we hear a lot in North America, and the expression is all the good men are married or gay. And this is what a lot of women say. And so that's a belief, right? And it's a belief. Now I want you to imagine that a woman walks into, say, a party, and there's a man standing over by the bar over there with a woman about his age. Well, if the woman walks in and she has the belief that all the good men are married or gay, what does she see? She sees a married man. That's what she sees. What she doesn't realize is that the guy is there with his sister. And his sister has been trying to get him out into the world because he went through a divorce about 3 years ago. But if you as a woman walk in and you assume all the good men are married or gay, there is no chance you're walking over to say hello.
That's exactly.
So our beliefs are like that. If somebody has a belief that public speaking is terrifying, then they will see that and they will create more evidence of it. And then the belief will get stronger and stronger. But the good news is that all you have to do to fix that is feed the opposite belief.
You also talk a lot about the stage effect. Can you go a little deeper into that?
The stage effect is a condition, almost a magical condition that takes place when somebody puts themselves on stage, puts themselves at risk, and shares value with an audience. And they create a magnetic attraction when they do that. As an introvert, if I go to a networking event, then I'm not likely to meet that many people because I'm not so very outgoing, right? But if I go do a presentation at that event, once I've finished my presentation, everybody wants to come and meet me because of the stage effect. But it's not just that they want to meet me. It's that my price in the market just went up. Like, I got to tell you that as a business coach or a business consultant, when I started speaking, my rates went through the roof. And I found out, funny enough, by saying no to stuff. So one of the things I've learned is when you don't want to do something, that's the best time to find out what the price tolerance is.
This podcast isn't meant to entertain you. It's meant to help you do life better by showing you how to think about and navigate important issues that aren't usually talked about to youngsters. But we believe that you need to hear this because it has the potential to change your life and the lives of other young people like you. So please share this episode with someone you care about, and if you haven't already, please hit the follow button. It helps us get these meaningful insights and messages in front of more youngsters.
The way you engage an audience is almost like you cast a spell on them, right? Now, I know this is the result of decades of work and experience and practice, but is there something that you can share with our young listeners, which just maybe gives them a few strategies as to how to keep the audience engaged?
Well, the first thing is I'll dispel the myth that you are propagating. In fact, public speaking is a very different type of skill. A skill that was already always constantly present inside you. It's not one you have to learn, it's one you have to unleash. It's already there. Nobody was born afraid of public speaking and nobody was born unable to communicate. If you take somebody who's, a moderately good tennis player and you give them 2 or 3 glasses of wine, does that make them a better tennis player? Absolutely not. But if you take the average person and give them 2 glasses of wine, do they become a better storyteller? Every time.
Every time.
That's because the skill is in there. The problem is the ego, the human skin that society has conditioned us to wear. Well, that feeling of who should I be is the acknowledgement of the inauthenticity of changing yourself for the judgment and expectations of other people. You just want to be you. Now, of course, there's some skills, I can share some of those. There's some skills and strategies that help with all that. But the number one thing is showing up as authentically you.
Which goes back to the most important trait you said.
Exactly.
In a speaker.
My job as a speaker is to create this bubble of experience around the audience and not to pop that bubble. And the way you pop that bubble is with silly things like talking down to them. That'll pop the bubble every time. But also reacting to things that happen inside of the bubble. Like if something goes wrong and you acknowledge that it went wrong. So say your microphone does something funny and you go, oh, my microphone's doing something funny. That pops the bubble. Better just go on with it. Just move on with the whole thing. If somebody's phone rings, it's not their phone that pops the bubble. It's your reaction. So if the phone is ringing, you got to know what's going on. The person whose phone it is feels terrible. And the people around them are pissed off with them, right? Like they're not happy with. So then you take a look and go, well, I want to stop all that because all that's popping the bubble. So instead what you do, I do this all the time. The phone starts ringing and I'm talking, I'm passionately telling a story and the phone rings and I go, could you get them to call me back later? And I just make a joke about it. That keeps the bubble intact.
Did you ever flub on stage and how did you overcome it?
I've never had a calamity on stage where I feel like I really messed it up. But I will tell you, there's been about 3 or 4 times where I've walked off the stage and thought, nailed it. That was amazing. And those are the 3 or 4 times that the producer came and said, no, it wasn't exactly what the audience loved it, but it wasn't what the producer wanted. And you have to remember, the producer is the client, not the audience.
Gen Z is a very socially conscious generation. Do you think And how do you think that public speaking can be an effective tool in their social activism?
Yes, I do. I just think they should be doing a lot more listening than speaking. What we're seeing at the moment in social activism is a lot of people that are saying a lot of things in their 20s with the wisdom of a 20-year-old, which is not a lot of wisdom yet. Anybody who feels inclined towards social justice and economic justice and environmental justice and so on, do not go into an argument for which you cannot successfully argue both sides.
Agreed.
So if you want to get into the transgender debate, you should be able to argue both sides. If you want to get into the gun debate, you should be able to argue both sides. I don't care which it is. If you can't argue both sides, you can't argue your side properly. And so what we're seeing right now is a lot of people that are very passionate about their causes, but they don't understand the opposition to their cause. So the minute they're met with any kind of smart rhetoric, the minute they're met with a great debate, they're shut down. Be very careful about fashionable causes. You know, don't go into a cause because it's fashionable. Go into a cause because you really are passionate about it and it matters. So that said, I would encourage every single person of every age to start becoming really comfortable with improv, public speaking, and debate. Those skills will set them apart for life. I would just be gentle about using them until they really have formed solid opinions, until they really feel great. That's the way I would look at speaking. I see some people today that get, all empowered to do their public speaking, and then they're 22 years old and they're talking about climate change and they have no idea what they're talking about. So what we want to do is develop the skill, play with the skill, go to debating class and debate the other side and spar with people on both sides of the argument. Then you become effective.
And on a related note, entrepreneurship, it seems to be a very attractive career path for most Gen Z because of, their love of flexibility, independence, work-life balance. Do you not think that this is a key skill?
It is. I would say to you that we were in a position for many years that the royalty was a birthright. To become a member of a royal family, to get out of the fields or out of the factories, it was impossible. You were either in or out. And today, entrepreneurship is the opportunity to join the royal class anytime you want. Anyone can do it. Anyone can go out and create enough value in the world that they can create incredible time freedom and life freedom and economic freedom. And entrepreneurship is just, it's amazing.
Before we let you go, I want you to give the students one message. Just speak directly to them and tell them something that you think is really important based on your life experience, based on whatever you've been through, just something that you think is important for them to hear.
There's an old expression that hard times make for tough people and tough people make for good times and good times make for weak people. And weak people make for hard times. And that's a cycle that keeps repeating its way through history. And we are in a cycle at the moment where life has become so easy for us. It has become so easy. And meanwhile, we are dealing with more antidepressants and anxiety and fear than we ever have, despite the fact that we have air conditioning and central heating and food security, and we live in the safest times ever. So what I want to suggest is that where the world has taken a turn toward rewarding victimhood. That's what's going on. It's like I said before, if you make something look really hard, you get more benefit. What I want to suggest to you is you take this expression on. The easier you are to offend, the easier you are to control. Don't be so easy to offend. Don't take offense so easily, and certainly don't take offense on behalf of other people. It's not worth it. And I don't know if you play video games, but if you do, what would you do if the game got too easy? You would either turn up the skill level or you'd stop and you'd play something else. What if life was supposed to be like that? Because what happens in life is that when life starts to get hard, we back down. What I want to suggest to you is, what if you treated life like a video game? In a video game, you come to the end of level 1 and the big boss is there and you don't get all scared. You buckle down, you get ready and you attack it. And by the way, if you pass that level on your first attempt, it's kind of an empty experience anyway, isn't it? But if it takes you 15 tries, how good do you feel when you finally get through it? And so if you took that approach to life, you will be so much more fulfilled and so much happier, because I'm absolutely telling you something about life. It is a privilege. It's an honor to live in this time. It's an honor to be alive at all. And I just want to tell you that life is always consistently, persistently happening for you, not to you, especially when it doesn't feel that way.
That is such a powerful message. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. And I just really hope to welcome you back again someday.
I'm sure.
Thank you, Eric.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. I want to help you use what you learned here. And the best way to do that is to get a podcast buddy. That's someone who also listens to this podcast. Then talk to your podcast buddy about the one takeaway from this episode that resonated with you the most. That's it. That's all you have to do. Remember that much of what is talked about on this podcast is stuff that's not typically talked about to young people. And it should be. It's stuff that you need to know so that you can lead a life that's, you guessed it, smarter, richer, and braver. This is your host, Marilyn Pinto, signing off until next time.
If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to broach in our upcoming episodes, please email us at smarterricherbraver@gmail.com. And if you'd like to sign up for one of our award-winning programs, go to kfi.global and check out our upcoming schedule.